Oh, okay, we're live streaming.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this very extra special installment of Rogue Reads, where we are featuring two very special live guests, Robert Bailey and our own Lisa Black. And Lisa and I were lucky enough to interview two also very special legendary authors, whom you will meet in recorded segments throughout this episode, if all goes well. Now, chatting with Rogue Chris and Rogue Lisa, whenever I say that, I feel like I'm saying, remember, anybody old enough to remember like the Smurfs, and you feel like Smurf was used as a general word? I think we should do Rogue like that. Anyway, Rogue Lisa and Rogue Chris and I were chatting and trying to get the tech on this right. And Chris is a genius with it, so hopefully all goes smoothly. But if there are any glitches, it's because we had the opportunity to sit down with these two other authors in addition to our live guests and do something that we've never done before. So you're all a part of history here on Rogue Reads tonight. I am going to begin. And did I mention who those other guests are? I probably didn't. They are none other than Scott Turow and William Ken Kruger, side by side with Lisa Black and Robert Bailey. So I'm going to actually ask Robert, who goes by Bob, is that right? But we'll call him by his author name for this episode, to kick things off. And first, I'm going to introduce you to Robert with his bio, which reads like this. Robert Bailey is the Wall Street Journal bestselling author of the McMurtry and Drake legal thriller series, as well as the Both of His Haynes series. Oh, and there's also an inspirational novel, which I know will speak to some of our listeners' hearts. It's called The Golfer's Carol. Finally, he is appearing tonight with a brand new series about an ambulance-chasing lawyer named Jason Rich with the "So Clever It Hurts" slogan that says, I've got to read it carefully, in an accident, get rich. And if you go to Robert's Amazon page or something like that, you got to see how it's spelled, because Jason Rich and Rich is, it's so clever. I love it. Number one, New York Times bestselling author Patricia Cornwell calls this first in a new series, quote, a deliciously clever legal thriller that keeps you turning pages fast and furious. Bob works as a civil defense attorney and lives with his family in Huntsville, Alabama. Here's the flap copy for the very first in the series, Rich Blood. Attorney Jason Rich has made a fortune off other people's bad luck. But after a recent divorce and a stint in rehab, Jason has hit a rough patch. And things only get worse when his sister, is it Jana or Yana? You're going to tell us in just a moment, is accused of her husband's murder. Because when I was reading it, I read it as Jana. Even though Jason has no experience trying criminal cases, Jana begs him to represent her. Jason has mixed feelings about returning to Alabama and even more reservations about diving back into his sister's life. Between drugs, affairs, and the tendency to gaslight everyone in her inner circle, Jana has plenty of enemies in town. But did she hire someone to kill her husband? Jason isn't so sure. He heads back to his hometown to unravel the truth and face off against opponents old and new. So welcome to Rogue Reads, Bob. I would love for you to tell us in your own words, your own personal thoughts about the very first in this new series, Rich Blood.
So Rich Blood was a lot of fun to write. This is the cover, and really excited to write a little something new. It's in the same fictional world as the other thrillers that I've written, so there are some callbacks and cameos and Easter eggs for readers, but it introduces a new character, Jason Rich, who is a very successful billboard lawyer. And, you know, if you're familiar with just riding down interstate highways in the United States, you know, you see lawyers advertising their services on billboards. And I thought it would be neat to to make the main character of my story, you know, a lawyer that does that, and then put that lawyer in a situation that's a little bit out of his wheelhouse. And for Jason, who's a recovering alcoholic, who the first time you meet him in the story, he's being disciplined by the Alabama State Bar for being intoxicated at a deposition. He's in a tough stretch in his life, and he's called by his sister Jana, who still lives in their hometown of Gunnersville, Alabama. And Jana has kind of always been this person that's had this hold on Jason, you know, sort of gaslighted him his whole life. But he loves his sister, and you know, she drives him crazy, but he loves her, and he returns home to try to save her life, because she's on trial for capital murder of this murder for hire of her husband. But I think in the process, he's also trying to save his own life. Very much a scoundrel when you first meet him, and unlike any of the other main characters that I've drafted. But I think hopefully by the middle of the story, readers will start rooting for him, because this is his first jury trial ever. He's in his hometown. He's representing his sister, and there's some forces that are working against him in the story as well. So,
yeah, you definitely crafted somebody like we can see where the trajectory of him as a character, which we're going to get into later, might go. Thank you very much for that opening. I have some follow-up questions, which I'm hoping we will get time for. But Rogue Lisa Black had the good fortune to interview Scott Turow about his sure to be a fall hit suspect, which comes out, by the way, on September 27th. I think, Chris, now would be a great time to listen to Lisa and Scott if we can cut to that. I don't remember any sound.
Okay, I have no idea what this
Yeah,
picture is here.
I think we're missing audio. Was everybody missing audio? Show of hands.
Everyone was missing audio.
Ah,
Yeah.
You want me to play it again?
I could tell from Scott's I
Let
could
me
tell.
play it. Let me play it
Yeah.
again because I
Yeah,
could hear it.
Okay.
And
can hear
it's
it?
worth hearing. Let's see if it's because I was muted.
Okay.
That would
Good thinking.
maybe.
Let me check.
It shouldn't though, if you're sharing screen.
Okay. I'm sharing the screen.
Mm-mm. No audio for me.
Do you have it? Can you turn up your volume, Chris, on the computer louder or something?
I have it turned up all the way.
Okay. Okay. Well,
That's strange because we heard the audio earlier today.
yeah. Yeah.
Right.
I wonder if I shared screen and played it, do you think it would work?
You go ahead and try. It won't split
Oh.
out. It won't be split out, but go ahead and try.
Okay, if I figure out how to do that, except I can't. I don't see how to share screen on this. Can I?
Oh, I turned it back on for you now. I
Okay.
turned it on for you now. I'll make you host. I'll make you a co-host.
Okay.
Then you can.
Sorry, I wish we could, maybe Jenny and Bob should go back to his segment until we.
Well, I actually have a follow-up question that I would love to ask Bob. Are you here, Bob?
He's muted.
Bob, you want to unmute? I have an extra
Yeah.
question. Great. Okay, here is what my question was. In Rich Blood, there seems to be a social element. And I think that this is an aspect to all your work, but in Rich Blood, I was thinking you really examine some of the most tortured and torturous elements of our society. I'm wondering if you can speak to, how intentional this is, and is this a byproduct of being an attorney? Keep saying eternity. Can you talk about it in your work, and particularly in the first Jason Rich novel?
I think that I try to make the stories to feel as realistic and as authentic as I can. I try to. All my novels pretty much are set in real places in Guntersville, Alabama. Certainly that. It's a perfect type setting for a story because there's the beauty of the lake, but there's also, the lake is inherently dangerous, and there's also this place called Sand Mountain that's real in Alabama that's close to Lake Guntersville. That's a perfect kind of literary gold for like different things you can do with it. I put my villain in the story there because there is, there's definitely, it's off the grid places in that particular location. And so I thought it'd be a perfect place for my meth dealer to be from. And it has a reputation as that. And so, and then I think in terms of Jason's battle with addiction, that's something that a lot of lawyers deal with. There is an Alabama lawyers assistance program, just like there is one for doctors. And so I think the stress of the job, as well as the stress of family and failures that he has, combines with that. So I thought it would be interesting to explore that in a character who's really just trying to keep his head above water at some points. And then also a particular, I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but I've tried to. One of the things that I loved about this book is that Jason is inexperienced as a trial lawyer, which in civil law is quite common. You don't get to try a lot of cases as a civil lawyer. I've tried 5 jury trials in 23 years, and I'm pretty proud of my 5. Criminal lawyers are the ones that get in the courtroom all the time, but civil lawyers, there are a lot of them that settle a lot of cases, but don't have a whole lot of cases that go all the way to verdict. And so dealing with a lawyer who makes some mistakes, has to recover his fumble a few times, was kind of fun to deal with because the other main characters that I have drawn in my books have been very experienced and don't make those kind of mistakes. So that was also fun.
Yeah, I feel like that ties into who he's going to be as a series character, which we will get to later on. But no, that was a great answer. And when I was researching this show, I found it interesting to our audience members will probably as well that you were paired with Scott, because that experience of the flawed legal professional is something that I think in many ways Scott laid the groundwork for. And there's been a rich tradition of work. And now you are fulfilling the modern incarnation of that.
Well, I'm deeply honored to be a part of this panel because all of these authors that are on this panel are so, successful, and I followed all their careers. I read 1L when I was in law school. Presumed Innocent was one of the first books that I really fell in love with in the genre. And Scott really kind of invented the modern legal thriller. And so we all sort of, stand on, his shoulders a little bit. And and he also, his novels have serious characters like Sandy Stern and Rusty Savage, and the books kind of go along. So there's a lot you can learn from him. And definitely one of my heroes.
Yeah, no, I thought it was a really neat pairing. And
Okay.
interesting. You got it, Chris?
Let me try it. Let me try it from this other computer of mine. Okay. And let's see if it works.
Okay.
Do we have sound? We still don't have sound.
No.
No, I don't know why it won't.
Okay, well, let me try sharing my screen, and okay. I don't know what that means. Oh, start broadcast. Okay.
Oh, I've got to unshare. I'm sorry. Let me unshare.
It's okay.
I'll stop sharing.
Okay, I'm sharing screen.
Scott Turow's books have sold 30 million copies, with several turned into films after being a professor at Stanford, a Harvard Law graduate, and a U.S. attorney. He continued to work as an attorney, as well as serving as a consultant, president of the Authors Guild, and on several legal commissions. Thank you so much for joining us on Rogue Reads.
Thank you, Lisa. I appreciate you taking the time. It's really nice to meet you face to face.
You went from being an English professor at Stanford to a law student at Harvard, and made even that work for you and your writing career by being commissioned to write a book about law school, which was 1L, apparently a nickname for first-year law students. Only now that I've read up on your criticism of the Socratic method, and I've seen Legally Blonde like 7 times. It's in my top 5. So I have to ask, is the movie inaccurate because they no longer use that teaching method?
Well, no, I don't think the teaching method is defunct at this point. It's funny, but as the U.S. News and World Report's rankings have mattered more, there's been more of a consumer-friendly attitude toward law students from law school professors. In my day, it was still, count your lucky stars that you're here at, the fabulous Harvard Law School. And we'll treat you however we think it's wise to treat you. But in the new day, the Socratic method is applied less sadistically, to be honest. But that does not mean that there are not still some harsh applications. I have a friend who teaches at Harvard Law School, and I will allow her to go nameless. But she tells me that when a student is unprepared in class, in other words, she calls on them to, talk about the case, one of the cases the students were supposed to have read, and the student says, "I'm not prepared, professor." She looks at that student, he or she, and says, "Okay, tell me which of your classmates I should call on now." And in other words, it's it invokes 1984, with "Do It to Julia." It's and so but that's pretty tough. That still strikes me as pretty tough.
Are you fully retired now?
I'm not fully retired. I still have 2 pro bono cases that embroil me in writing briefs and going to court. If they ever end, one of them should end within the next year. The other one I don't know about. But I don't foresee picking up new pro bono cases. But I don't know. I would certainly argue an appeal, a pro bono appeal. So we'll just have to see kind of, what the cat drags through the door.
Okay. How do I? Okay, are we back?
Jenny?
You're
You
muted.
unmute?
Okay. Technical difficulties are abounding tonight, but at least we can get the videos to work, so that's a good thing.
Well, and she's got to go get a COVID person, I think. So
Oh, no.
I
Why?
asked you to
There
unmute.
Oh, there you are.
Good.
There
Sorry.
you are. Good.
I did have to get a COVID person, but now he doesn't have to come. It's okay. You don't even have to be exposed to his germs. Okay. Thank you, Lisa. And since Lisa was able to do that for us, I think we should definitely turn to her. And her hit summer release Red Flags, which is the first in a series like Bob Bailey's, a Locard Institute thriller #1. Just for anybody who does not know, our own rogue Lisa Black, she is a 25-year veteran of forensic work, now living in Florida. She's the New York Times bestselling author of the Gardner and Renner novels, and now the Locard Institute thrillers, featuring Dr. Ellie Carr and Dr. Rachel Davies. As a forensic scientist at the Cuyahoga County Coroner's Office, Lisa analyzed many forms of trace evidence in crime scenes. Now she's a latent print examiner and certified crime analyst for the Cape Coral Police Department in Florida. Jeff Lindsay, who's the author of Dexter, says that with this new series and with Lisa's firsthand knowledge of forensics added to her skill as a writer, you do not want to miss this author. I sicked some of them. Here's a flap copy for Red Flags, which we're going to ask Lisa to tell us about. When DC crime analyst Dr. Ellie Carr is called to investigate the heartrending case of a missing baby, she's shocked to discover the child's mother is her own cousin. Close during their impoverished childhoods, Ellie and Rebecca eventually drifted apart. And Rebecca is now half of a Washington power couple, living an opulent a charmed life in an opulent mansion until their infant son is taken. Every contact leaves a trace is the basic principle of forensic science, followed by Dr. Rachel Davies. Rachel is the assistant dean at the prestigious Locard Forensic Institute, named in honor of the French criminologist who inspired the profession. But in this case, discovering where those traces lead quickly becomes a dangerous journey through a web of greed and deadly ambition. Lisa, please tell us a little about the first in the new series, Red Flags.
Well, as you summarized, it's Ellie is a crime scene analyst in Washington, D.C., and she responds to the scene of a kidnapping and pulls up to this incredibly gorgeous mansion and learns that the baby disappeared out of his own crib in the middle of the day with both parents and a sibling at home. There's outside video cameras around this whole place with nobody appearing on them whatsoever. There's no ransom note. And so this is just pinging all sorts of red flags because that doesn't sound reasonable. And, she knows, unfortunately, you hate to think it, but what often happens in this case is the parents do know where the kid is. And they've come up with this story in a panicked moment when they're calling the cops, and it's probably going to fall apart with tragic consequences. But all of a sudden she walks in and the baby's mother happens to be her cousin, with whom she lived for a while when she was a kid, because she moved around a lot between aunts and uncles. I'll get more into that later. So of course that changes her whole complexion on the matter. It's like she can't believe her cousin would be lying to her. So she winds up working on the case. And then her cousin's husband, Hunter, has hired the Locard Institute because he's got a ton of money and he wants the best. He doesn't want the FBI. To him is the local cops, and they're probably not going to be good enough. So he wants to hire the Locard Institute, which just astounds Ellie. It's like, are you kidding? A private institute in my crime scene? It's like, it can't work like that. So the two women have to learn to work together.
which, like with Bob, is just an amazing trajectory. You can see it, and I will get into this for a series. I was particularly interested, and I wonder if you could speak a little bit. Well, I was particularly interested in some of the wealth gap, like the privilege from the impoverished childhood to the privilege of being able to hire whomever expert. But there was something in the very first scene that jumped out at me, and it was where I think Ellie said something about a missing child case takes on a completely different, aspect if it's a baby. And I was thinking, for you as a forensic scientist, like all the evidence that you wouldn't be privy to when it's an infant as opposed to a child who walks and leaves. Can you say a little bit about that opening in the scene?
Well, it occurs to her that it's a different situation when you have an infant. I mean, this baby's only 4 months old. I mean, he's not even turning over, by himself. He certainly didn't get up and walk away, which of course with a child, as any parent knows, I'm sure, you turn your back and they're, halfway down the driveway. They can, and when they get older, if they're school age, they can go over to a friend's house and forget to tell you. They can be out playing in the yard. There's all sorts of possibilities as to where you're going to look for them. It's like, did they fall in the creek? Did Timmy fall down a well? You don't have that option when there's a baby. So, there really can't be an innocent explanation to this.
Yeah, it was very chilling. So we are very lucky to have Lisa here, having interviewed Scott and now live on the show. I was also lucky enough to get to interview one of my longtime favorite authors, William Kent Kruger, a few weeks ago. Kent is going to be talking about Fox Creek, which is the latest in his Quirk O'Connor mystery series. And if all goes well, we will hear him right now. It better go well because I have no capacity to do what Lisa did with her.
Yeah. Well, that's okay. I have access to it if you don't.
You're going to need to share it. For my system is not doing the sound.
Okay, let me try. Start broadcast. Just do it like I had. Oh, the other ones. Okay. Kent, intro and reading. I think that's the one.
Yep.
Fingers crossed. Hello. My internet's a little slow.
Don't nobody notice I'm wearing the same necklace.
Oh, wait. I think this one might be wrong. I think, because it says 23 minutes.
Oh, yeah.
So that can't be right.
It's not, it's not turn. It's not the,
It should be though.
yeah, but it didn't get cut. It didn't get cut.
Yeah,
Let me see
that's
if I
right.
can share it. Let me try and share.
That's the one that didn't quite work.
All right, see if this is working.
Oh, wait, I got to stop screen sharing, right?
Can you hear it?
No.
All right, can you see it?
Mm-hmm.
Can you hear it?
No.
It's not going through. The sound is not going through.
Okay, let me try again. I know it's frustrating, but oh, I keep forgetting that once I do that, I have to actually go. All right.
You're just going to have to stop sharing it at a certain point. Play the 23-minute one, but you'll know when to stop sharing.
Okay. Let's just hope this works. And it's loading.
Lisa, stop sharing right after the reading, and then we'll go into our author.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. That should work. Hopefully. It's just loading. Probably because it's a long video. Please work.
We could call up the COVID person to do this, but it's really not a sight you want to see. And maybe the germs come through the computer.
I don't know why it was working earlier and now it's not working. Crazy.
Just, I don't know. Why don't I try one of the other videos? Maybe. All right. I'm sorry to go out of order, but maybe this will.
Shows, Rogue Reads, which feature a big, range of authors, all favorites of ours, get kind of emotional. I have a very personal association to the new Kent Kruger called Fox Creek, and sort of a connection to an earlier one in the series, which if our readers are not completely caught up with, I hope they were, that one's called Desolation Mountain, which is that, as some Rogue participants in the series know, I lost my dad unexpectedly last year. And at the end of his life, he had a vision of himself walking into the woods. Ken, I would love you to talk about the emotional dimension in the Cork O'Connor series, which critics and readers alike often call out as kind of an unusual dimension in some mystery and crime fiction. And I'd like to know, do you think of it as something intentional that you're really adding in upon revision? Does it grow out of who you are as a writer, as a person? Speak to that emotional kind of intimate layer in the books.
So back in the day when I taught creative writing, what I would tell my students is that a good story isn't about what happens. It's about who it happens to. And so always the first order of business for me when I'm creating a story is to make sure that I have created characters who are human, who are flawed, who readers can really relate to realistically. And if you do that right from the get-go, then you've hooked the reader emotionally. They end up caring about what happens to the people involved in the story. If you don't do that, it's just any mystery just becomes sort of an academic pursuit. And who likes that? I think a good story always goes for the heart. It's easy for me to write rich characters in the Cork O'Connor series because a lot of the characters come out of people I know or my own background. Cork is a family man. I'm a family man. I write a lot about Cork's relationship with his children, with his two spouses. And for me, it's an easy thing to do because I just tap into my own sense of family, my own sense of priorities, my own sense of how we ought to behave in the world. And it seems to resonate with readers.
It does resonate with readers. And Rogue Read audience members, you just got, I think, a secret tidbit about Ken's answer to, do we pull from our own life into the books? And that's something so many emerging writers ask about. So thank you for that answer. I would like to know, another thing we talk about on Rogue Reads a lot is writing a series versus writing a standalone. You're now on number 19 of the New York Times bestselling series. Tell us, keeping it fresh and keeping it new and keeping that connection to Cork alive.
Well, I made a terrific decision very early on. From the very first book onward, I decided that I was going to create a dynamic protagonist. For those who are watching, who are writers, Mystery Writing 101. I think when you create a mystery, you have only two choices. If you're going to create a series, you have only two choices of the kind of protagonist you're going to create for the series. You can create a static protagonist or you can create a dynamic protagonist. What's a static protagonist? That's someone who never changes, someone who's the same story to story to story. Think Sherlock Holmes here. You've read one Sherlock Holmes story, he's going to be the same Sherlock Holmes in every story you read after that. What's a dynamic protagonist? That's somebody who does change, somebody who ages, somebody for whom what happens in one of the stories is reflected in how the character responds to the world in subsequent entries in this series. So when I began the series, Cork was about 40 years old. Now I'm writing him, he's 55. So he and the characters in the story have all aged approximately 15 years. So we watched his children grow. We watched the relationships change. We watched how they see each other and the world change. And for me, then, what that means is every time I sit down to write a new novel in the Cork O'Connor series, I'm writing about different people. They're not the same people they were the last time around. There are things about them that are the same, but they've been changed by what's happened to them in the past. And so that keeps it writing fresh for me and interesting for me because I'm on this journey along with them, discovering where they're going as they discover where they're going. And I do believe that that's a good deal of what keeps it fresh for the readers as well.
Yeah, I was going to say that the readers who are listening tonight do talk about that element of sort of following on along on a life journey. So the way you're describing it, I can't quite imagine why you would not write a dynamic.
Well, I don't know why anybody doesn't write this way, but no, everybody does it. Every writer makes his or her own choices.
Yeah.
It's whatever's comfortable for you and what your vision is for your series.
Right. And we wouldn't want to not have Sherlock Holmes, but it's a very interesting point. So that was a great segue, I think, into each of our writers who are our authors who are here now. We'll start with the live ones, talking about their series, especially because for both Lisa and Bob, you're kicking off a new series with the Jason Rich series and the Ellie and Rachel series. Lisa, I guess, well, no, we just had Lisa. So Bob, why don't you tell us about how, and I think that our listeners are really going to be interested, how did you come up with the idea for this new series? Different from where you'd been before. And also, what was the creative side of it like coming up with it, but also maybe the industry side of it? How did you pitch it to your agent, your editor? What was the whole process like? And then after you tell us about Jason Rich, we'll go over to Lisa and you'll tell us about Red Flags.
Well, I loved listening to that segment with Kent. That was really cool. It certainly echoes a lot of my own beliefs about building characters. But I think with Jason Rich, I keep a little notebook of ideas. And so I had always wanted to feature a character that was a plaintiff's lawyer that advertised with billboards. And so I think putting that character in sort of a dynamic where he has to work defending his own family is really at the heart of the situation here. Jason has got all these personal problems of his own, but he has to come back to Guntersville and represent his sister, which creates this family drama, which is kind of at the heart of this series. Jason did not have a real close relationship with his sister or his father. And so when he comes back to Guntersville, he sort of is trying to reconnect with her a little bit, although the circumstances are crazy. And then his father, who's deceased, the memory of his passing and just never really measuring up to his dad. Jason's father was the stoic, Atticus Finch type small town lawyer who everybody looked up to. And, Jason is this kind of tacky, puts up billboards everywhere. His law firm does Gatorade baths after big mediation settlements. He's just off the wall. He's different. And he really sort of rebelled against his father's first billboard he puts up right next to his dad's office. So there's a rebellious nature to him that goes along with the character. And I think a lot of room to grow, as Mr. Kruger was saying, through the series. The first time you meet him, he's extremely immature, successful, but immature, a bit narcissistic. And as he grows in this story, he improves as a person and as a lawyer.
So a dynamic series character by Kent's rubric, for sure.
Definitely, yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, it's all about him were these sort of like very flawed traits, but also the potential for heroism in a very emotional way. So right. Sounds great. I look forward to number 2. So Lisa, in Red Flags, first of all, coming off very successful series already, you knew what you were doing. And you decided to pair 2 new series characters. So same kind of question, like, the genesis of it all.
Well, what's different about Red Flags is for the first time, I actually planned it as a series. My other 2 series, it's like I wrote a book that I really liked and then the publisher, wanted me to turn it into a series. This time I actually sat down and tried to think through what I would need to get through a whole series, basically make characters interesting enough and deep enough and have enough going on in their lives that I could use and would work into the plots as I went through. So I came up with a kind of a wild backstory for Ellie it's not wild. Her mother died when she was 4. So she grew up with a succession of aunts and uncles and cousins. And, first with her grandmother, and then with an aunt and uncle and some cousins, and then aunt and uncle and some cousins, and then an aunt and uncle who were doctors who kind of steered her into the medical field. And this sounds terrible, but they were a very, very close-knit, loving, very loving family. So she never felt insecure. She always knew that there would be people who took care of her and loved her. But still, it was a lot of moving around for a child. So that affected, some things in her life. And then the other character, Dr. Rachel Davies, had a very stable upbringing. She had a loving home, and she went to medical school, and she was a pathologist. And the only slightly unusual thing in her life is she's raising her sister was killed in just kind of a wrong place, wrong time crime. And so Rachel is now raising the 2-year-old son of her sister, who she just absolutely loves, the little boy. But the boy's biological father is a soldier in the army. So he's on deployment at moment, but there's a possibility that he could want to come back into the child's life. And that just, the thought of losing him just would devastate her. So she has that kind of worry always in the back of her mind. And so those are my 2 new characters.
So you gave a lot of thought to how you could give them kind of meaty interior lives, which you could mine and book after book.
Yeah, they have big I come from a big family, so it's like I really enjoy my cousins, and there's so much you can do with that, because it's a huge network of people, and they're all in different places and they do different things. And her cousins are grown now, just like she is. So they all have different jobs, and, one's a newspaper, one's a TV reporter. And then the uncles who are doctors, and one's a mechanic and taught her all, how to fix a truck and things like that. One's an artist. So it gives her a lot of possibilities and resources.
Yeah, fun. Okay, thank you. Lisa, do you think it'll be possible to play Scott's segment on, he had some thoughts on this whole topic too.
Yes. Let's see. That was on, whoops. I don't know what happened. Oh, okay. Sorry. All right, we need Scott on characters, right?
Oh, yeah, that'll feed
Is
in.
Pinky based on anyone in particular? Do we learn how Sandy Stern's granddaughter could go off the rails?
No, I loved, by the way, your introductory description of her as a reformed problem child. And with your permission, I'm going to steal that for the remainder of the book.
Yes, of course.
All right, thank you, because that's just a great way to talk about her. I think Pinky, as you go along in the novel, you realize that she describes herself as the child of a very normal suburban upbringing. Her dad was a former football star in what I call the mid-10, but everybody knows what I'm referring to, who just didn't quite have the chops to make it as a professional. And her mother was, they got together in high school where she was the prom queen. And of course, as life rolled along, they discovered that they didn't have a lot. They had much less in common than they thought to start with. And, there was a lot of rancor in the household, although much of it unspoken. But there was no reason for Pinky to be the way she was, except for one thing. And late in the novel, she confesses to a lover that, she's had tons of therapy. And one of the things that a therapist said to her, and Pinky says when the therapist said it, she wanted to take her Eames chair and throw her and the chair out the window. But what she said to her was that your mother, who was the daughter of Sandy Stern, and these events are portrayed in my second novel, The Burden of Proof. Sandy Stern's wife, Clara, has killed herself. She's been a suicide. And what the therapist says to Pinky is that I don't think you had a normal bond with your mother, that she was so overwhelmed by the suicide of her own mother and so deep in her own sense of mourning and loss that she never really had the ability to connect with her child. And so that's the working hypothesis in the novel. And you know, for Pinky, like all of us, you can't unmake the past. And and as she says, you know, she hated the therapist for saying it, except that she recognized that the best she could tell, it was true. And you know, what the therapist was saying, Pinky ultimately concludes, is it probably wasn't even my mom's fault, but it certainly wasn't mine. And of course, like all children less loved than they might be, she's gone through her life feeling like there's something wrong with her, and that's why she's acted out. In other words, she's become the person who you know, she thinks her mom saw her as being.
Well, speaking of Sandy Stern, her grandfather, and your character who's been in all your books, I've been advised to ask about the meaning of the title "The Last Trial," the 2020 book in which Sandy Stern puts off a health-mandated retirement to take his friend's case. Supposedly, there's 2 or even 3 explanations for that title.
Well, the simplest is that Stern has promised his family that he will retire after this case. So it really is his last trial. There's a kind of wordplay going on about a clinical trial of a medication, which really is the basis of the fraud prosecution, which Stern is defending. So, and of course, you know, the trial is more than just what's going on in the courtroom. It's it's the trial of life. And, you know, Stern's got a lot of stuff to deal with. The most obvious and universal problem being that he is getting old. He is 85 years old. And even though he does a highly competent job in the courtroom, he's not fully who he was once. And he's not completely the magician that he used to be. He makes mistakes, especially early on when he's nervous. So multiple meanings in that title. Thank you for asking.
It's a very poignant reply. So one of the things we love on Rogue Reads is readings. I am wondering, I think this would probably be the best order given the audio. Lisa, maybe you can read us a short excerpt from Red Flags, and then you will figure out the audio for the recorded ones while Bob reads us a short excerpt from Red Flags. Does that make sense?
Okay, I will try.
And let me just say, everybody who is listening and registered for the event tonight, you are all automatically entered to win one of these fantastic smash hit 4 books, which I will go down at the end of our episode. So take it away, Lisa. Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to read like part of the first chapter where after Ellie has arrived at the scene and she's met with Becca, and Becca is walking her through the scene of the crime, which is the baby's nursery, and giving her what, you know, the sequence of events that had occurred during the day. Becca gave a little huff of annoyance, a sound Ellie hadn't heard since the 9th grade, as her body sketched out parts of the story with elbows and fingers. I put Mason down for a nap, but then remembered I had to pick up Taylor. They had early dismissal today. With the tuition we pay those teachers, they have more time off than they have on. But Tara said she'd stay with him. I checked on him. He was sleeping, so I left him here. She halted again, no doubt remembering the last time she'd seen her infant son. Ellie could picture him herself, the tiny curled fingers, the peach fuzz hair, the almost imperceptible rise and fall of his fragile chest. She didn't rush her cousin. The time to rush had passed. Gabriel drove out at about the same time, right behind me. That was probably 11:30. How far is the school? About 8 miles. Potomac Lakes Academy, training future captains of industry for 50 years. The pickup line was a nightmare as usual. I don't know why that place even bothers to provide a bus service that none of the kids will deign to use, including mine. I was stressing because I didn't want to hold Tara up too much. Harper's such a fussy baby. That morning she had been super mellow, sleeping through everything, but once she decides she's over it, she is over it. Harper? Tara's little girl. And Tara hates breastfeeding anywhere except home. I tell her she's crazy, but it is what it is. So she hustled out of here. Hunter pulled in about 5 minutes later. That was maybe 12:30. We unpacked him and he disappeared into the basement with a treadmill. He likes to blast 70s rock when he does that. The workout room is right under the kitchen, and I thought he might not have heard Mason if he cried. The music was that loud. So I went upstairs. Becca's words ended in an odd little strangled sound. She stood still and listless next to the large white bassinet. And, Ellie prompted. She seemed to push herself to the next part. I stood there like an idiot for a second. I actually touched the mattress, even though I could see he wasn't there. Then I started screaming. You know how sometimes your brain works out something long before you do? It was like my head sped through every possible explanation in one instant, and I knew that there was no logical explanation. So I screamed. Next thing I knew, Taylor stood here shaking my arm. I must have scared the crap out of her. I'm sure she'll be describing that to a therapist someday. I told her to run down the back staircase to get Hunter. He couldn't hear me over the stereo. He came up, but his bed was just like you see it, empty. Becca wrapped her arms around herself, and Ellie saw emotions she never expected to find in her tough, stubborn cousin's face. Grief and a very real fear. He was just gone. Where is my son, Ellie? Where is my baby?
That's a scene to tug at anybody's heartstrings. And incite a little panic as well. Thank you, Lisa. So, okay, while you fiddle with the recordings of Kent reading and Scott reading, Bob, would you be willing to read us an excerpt from Rich Blood?
Sure. This is this is chapter 20, and Jason has now just gotten back to Gunnersville. He hasn't seen his sister yet, but he's about to. He spent the night in a hotel room, and he's about to go to the jail and visit with her for the first time, and sort of kind of lets you in his mind a little bit as the main character. Jason had never loved Lake Gunnersville. Weird since he was born and raised there, but he just never took to it. Jana, of course, was the opposite. She'd gotten up on her skis the first attempt, had tubed, wakeboarded, and boat surfed like a champion. She could line a fishing pole after a cursory explanation from their father and was driving the boat at 10 years old. She'd been the proverbial duck in water, while Jason had been, as his father joked, like a monkey effing a football. Confidence is a strange thing. When you're good at something, you want to do it more and more, and confidence breeds repetition and practice, which produces excellence. Jason had never felt confident on the water. Everything took him longer to do, and his sister was always 3 steps ahead. When he was 13 years old, they boated over to Goat Island, a popular spot with a cliff that kids and adults like to jump off. The highest precipice was 50 feet up in the air. Naturally, Jana climbed to the top and jumped from it without a moment's hesitation. When Jason managed to jump from the smallest cliff, still a good 20 feet high, his feat felt like a failure, a whimper in the face of Jana's scream. The memories had flooded Jason's brain during his drive home, and as Harry had warned, he did pass a few convenience and liquor stores that seemed to be calling his name. Fortunately, he'd pressed on without stopping, though the Porsche had topped out at 110 miles per hour several times, and he was lucky he didn't get a ticket. Now, sipping hot complimentary coffee from a styrofoam cup that he'd got in the Hampton Inn lobby, Jason gazed out at Lake Gunnersville, thinking of his jump from the Goat Island cliff those many moons ago, and his insufferable sister, who he'd be seeing again in a little less than an hour. He'd gotten the hotel room for a couple of nights with the option of extending his stay if needed. In all honesty, Jason didn't have a clue how long he'd be here. He thought about going out to the family homestead, and he knew he would eventually, but first he needed to get his bearings and see Jana. Jason sighed and glanced behind him and up the hill to the hotel and then to his right, where there was now a waterfront Wenzel's Oysters house. As he'd driven through downtown Gunnersville at 11 o'clock last night, he hadn't noticed many changes. Now in the daylight, he could see a few subtle signs of what some people would call progress. Jason figured that most lawyers who were from out of town would stay at this very Hampton Inn during a trial week. It was a mile from the courthouse and a stone's throw to Wenzel's, which would be a good place to unwind after a long day in court. Just the thought of it made him crave a shrimp po' boy and a beer, and he shook off the images. Standing on a wooden dock that jutted out from the hotel parking lot, Jason could see boats on both sides of the Highway 431 overpass. And in the north and in the south directions, he could see billboards with his smiling face on them. In a wreck, get rich.
I love it. He's a good start to a series character because you can see all the places he has to go. Thank you, Bob. All right, Lisa, how are we doing with those two readings? Lisa, I think you're muted.
Oh yeah, let's try. Okay.
Welcome to this very special
Sorry,
segment
this is going
of
back to the
September
beginning
Road
because
Reads,
it's
where
gonna
I
have
get to talk with William Kent Kruger, one of my favorites from way, way back, New York Times bestselling and Edgar Award winning author of the Cork O'Connor Mystery Series. I'm going to give a brief introduction before we get on to the interview. So this is my favorite part of Kent's bio. Raised in the Cascade Mountains of Oregon, which are beautiful, William Kent Kruger briefly attended Stanford before being kicked out for radical activities. I did not know that. We're not going to make it part of the interview. Kent writes the mystery series known as the Cork O'Connor Mystery Series, set in the North Woods of Minnesota. His novels have won a number of awards, including the Minnesota Book Award, the Lost McKnight Fiction Award, the Anthony, the Barry, the Dillies, and the Friends of American Writers Prize. His last 9 Cork O'Connor mysteries were all New York Times bestsellers. Ordinary Grace, published in 2013, won the Edgar. And the companion novel This Tender Land, which came out in 2019, spent nearly 6 months on the New York Times bestseller list. The latest Cork O'Connor is Fox Creek, out the end of this month, August 23rd, I believe. Is that right, Ken?
That's correct.
Features Cork in a race against time to save his wife, a mysterious stranger, and an Ojibwe healer from bloodthirsty mercenaries. So, Kent, welcome. The Rogues are all so excited to have you on. Thank you.
It's a pleasure to be with you. Thanks for the invitation.
I promised Rogue Reads listeners a treat, and what that is that William Kent Kruger will read us a short excerpt from the new Fox Creek. I hope absolutely everybody listening this evening already has the book on their pile, but if not, please order it. We have the lucky pleasure, thanks to Kent's publisher, of giving away a copy of the new Fox Creek. That only means that you'll have an extra copy to give a Christmas, or holiday gift to. Follow Kent on all social, and if you're registered for Rogue Reads tonight, you will be entered after that to win a copy of Fox Creek. And now I'm going to let Kent take it away with a short reading.
Sure, let me set up the reading.
Yeah.
And it was very interesting to me, Jenny, when you commented on the death of your father and how at the end he saw himself walking into the woods, a vision of walking into the woods. The last contemporary novel in the Cork O'Connor series, the last novel that preceded Lightning Strike, Desolation Mountain, ends with Henry Malou and Cork's son Stephen, who also has visions, sitting at a campfire, and Stephen reveals to Henry that he has had a vision of Henry's death, to which Henry replies, "I know." And that's the way the story ends. So Fox Creek, it's been several years since I published that novel. I've had a lot of time to think about, okay, where do you go from there? So Fox Creek is in large measure about addressing the vision of Henry's death. And I open with this particular prologue, which centers on Henry Malou. He's an old man with more than a century of living behind him. When he rises each morning, there is no part of his body that doesn't feel the weight, the ache, the wear of all those years. Although he moves more slowly now, he still unceasingly walks the forests with which he has been in intimate communication since he was a boy, spends full days alone in the great North Woods. His disappearances have become a cause for concern among those who care about him, and there are many, not only on the Iron Lake Reservation, but also in the town of Aurora and across much of Tamarack County, Minnesota. When he returns from a long absence and sees the worry on their faces, he smiles and asks, "What are you afraid of?" Their answers are vague fears for his safety. "If I lie down somewhere on a soft bed of pine needles and begin my journey into the next world without a chance for you to say goodbye, you can always burn tobacco and send me your prayers. I will hear," he promises. His body is a thin wall between this world and that which awaits him beyond, but sometimes his spirit travels between these two worlds. He has occasionally flown like an eagle and seen from a high place his own body lying as if lifeless under a canopy of pine boughs. He understands his death as an experience neither to fear nor to welcome. It is simply a place toward which he has been walking since the moment of his birth. The world around him is one that has both showered him in delight and presented him with enormous challenge. The delight has always been in nature, in the beauty it has offered, the solace, the lessons, the wisdom, the healing, the communion of spirits. The challenge has been of the humankind. At the hands of human beings, he has experienced cruelty, pain, deceit, avarice, jealousy, hate. Most of his life, he has been a healer, working in the ways of the natural world to help guide others to a place of harmony. It is the purpose to which he is born. But he feels the pull of another calling now, one that despite his age and knowledge and wisdom, he doesn't understand. It is a calling dark, melancholy, and unsettling. As he walks the woods in the communion of spirits, he asks for answers which have not come. Patience has always been his grounding, but he feels himself growing restless and uncertain. He feels he is being followed, but not by anything human. Death is his shadow. The prospect of his own death isn't what troubles him. It's the sense that death will come to others, come far too early in their journey through this world. What the old man, this ancient soul, is trying to understand is this: am I the one who stands between death and the others, or am I the one who leads death to them?
Many critics have talked about the lyricism of William Ken Kruger's prose, and I think hearing the description of being a thin wall between worlds know exactly why he gets such praise. Thank you, Ken. I mean, that was really very moving and meaningful, and I don't see how anybody hearing that, whether they're new to Cork or a longtime fan, won't need to read this book and find out the answer. Which is it?
Yeah. You are awfully kind, Jenny. Thank you.
Jenny, you're muted.
Jenny, you're still muted.
Sorry, guys. I had the host muted me, so I could not. Sorry. I told you, I am an absolute Zoom dunce. You're very glad I did not need to get that reading in there. Lisa, are you able to go over to Scott's reading? Is that part of it?
Yeah, let me do that just now. Okay, now that I kind of have this down a little, trying anyway.
In your new book, Suspect, a reformed problem child named Pinky is working for private investigator Rick. They are hired by none other than the chief of the Chicago PD, Lucia Gomez, extremely well-liked, more than capable, and Rick's childhood friend. Lucia is being smeared as a lawsuit alleges she demanded sex from subordinates in exchange for promotions. Now, Pinky likes to kick back with a Stella and some pork rinds. So viewers and fans, feel free to crack open a cold one while we listen to a short section of Suspect.
All right, so Pinky first appeared in The Last Trial, my most recent novel. She's Sandy Stern's granddaughter, and in The Last Trial, she sort of discovers her investigative chops, and when her grandfather retires, she becomes a private investigator attached, as you summarized, to Rick Dudek's law firm. And this is how she describes her happiness with her late in life discovery that she wants to be a PI. Here's the truth. I love to snoop and pry. I get a butt-tightening thrill out of it. Maybe some of that has to do with how often I miss signals. Investigating is like being the Invisible Man. Not the one from the book I had to read in high school, but the old movie. Somebody who can drift around and look in on people without ever really being seen. Oh, I think often, oh, so that's this chick's deal. And when I'm being a PI, I can do stuff that's hard for me ordinarily. I don't have to grope for the words with strangers because I'm there to ask, what do you know about Joe Blow or Clown Brown? I don't care about the usual judgy thoughts people have about crazy Pinky because I've got a job to do. At night, I spend hours watching YouTube and visiting obscure sites, trying to master what I call the P-bot. The P-bot has nothing to do with algorithms or robots. It means the private investigator's bag of tricks. That started with a concealed carry permit, training included in my PI course. Now I'm always reading about and practicing skills, surveillance techniques, disguises, clever ruses to get people to talk. But none of that has helped me learn much about the weird guy next door. That's Pinky's other plot problem, which is fella's moved in next door to her who's so strangely silent that she begins fantasizing that, you know, maybe he's a hitman, maybe he's a guy in witness protection, maybe he's on the run from, you know, some criminal organization, and she, in her own way, is unable to accept the advice of just leave the guy alone. He acts like somebody who wants to be left alone. Leave him alone. She can't. She just can't bring herself to do it.
She sounds very fun, and the book sounds really interesting. I was immediately drawn in by the plot because, you know, as a female, I immediately want to side with the police chief. But there's always that little worry. What if she's lying? Not only betraying her profession, but the people who believed in her. So what prompted this plot? Have you dealt with he said, she said cases? And I can imagine they're very difficult to prove.
Yeah, I certainly have dealt with he said, she said cases. You know, and I have to admit, as a defense lawyer, I didn't have many sexual assault cases, but I had one or two. One of them, frankly, was quite revealing because a client was accused of sexual assault, and when I ultimately was lucky enough to get the victim talking, she basically agreed with his story, which was they'd had consensual sex. However, she thought with some justification that her consent had been secured on the basis of fraud, the fraud being that he had told her he was unmarried, and he was very much married. So she was so honked off that she accused him of rape. And ultimately, with whatever reluctance, she agreed to the dismissal of the charges. And so, you know, in that case, the he said, she said was probably worked appropriately in the defendant's favor. In other cases, of course, you know, you're injecting doubt where doubt shouldn't exist. I wrote a novella which originally appeared as a serialized book it was serialized weekly in the New York Times Magazine. It's called Limitations. And that's about a really ugly sexual assault case where, 4 high school hockey players take a young woman who's passed out drunk and each have a good time with her. And they're so impressed with themselves that they videotape it. And then the tape comes to light many years later. And the question is whether it's too long for these boys to be prosecuted. And that's the issue that faces my central character, who's a judge. So, as I say, I didn't do a lot of sexual assault cases. The ones I handled were all pro bono. It can be complicated, or it can be as simple as, he done it and he's just looking for a great way out of it to, interrogate the victim and make a victim out of her in the courtroom.
We get into some very tough stuff in Rogue Reads. Wow. It was a pleasure for me. Thank you for doing that interview, Lisa, because it was really neat to hear Scott. So as usual with Rogue Reads, we've gone over. I know we have questions in the chat. I'm going to choose one of these questions, which will direct toward Lisa and Bob, our live guests. I just want to thank everybody for coming, especially our authors. Thank you to Ken Kruger and Scott Turow for being recorded and able to join us that way. Thank you to Lisa Black and Robert Bailey for being live with us tonight. Thank you for all the tech wrangling, Chris and Lisa both. Everybody who's registered for Rogue Reads, you are registered to win a copy of Red Flags, of Rich Blood, of Suspect, of Fox Creek. And the question that I'm going to choose to ask Lisa and Robert, Bob, have you take it away first, is do your characters talk to you? And if so, what is that process like?
So yeah, they do. And so that process is the coolest part. And for me, I just finished the sequel to Rich Blood. And so on Friday and Saturday, towards the end of the book, it really does start to really kind of become, in my thought process, almost magical, where it starts going from head to fingers really fast. And it does almost feel like you're reading a book when you can't put it down, but it's popping right out of your head. And that buzz, is the best. It's the reason I write. And it normally happens at some point during the story. And so I think certainly they do talk to you, and occasionally a character. In my very first book, The Professor, I had Tom McMurtry have a bulldog, and I just wanted him to have a dog, but in the middle of the book, the dog decided that he was going to do something kind of central to the plot. So those things just happen, and I call them, it's just sort of magical things. And sometimes you'll write something the character does, and then you'll know immediately that that's not something that Jason would do or what that Bo would do. And so they sort of talk back to you. But yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Good question too. Lisa?
I've been asked that question before, and I'm always kind of embarrassed to say, but my characters don't talk to me. I don't know what that's like. To me, it's like I see them like they're on a stage and I'm the director. And, sometimes I'm like behind the camera or something. I don't exist in their world. So they don't, so they don't talk to me. They talk to each other. And I feel like sometimes I'm standing there right next to them, watching them do these things, but it's like I'm a ghost. They don't know I'm there. So that's just the way it's always worked for me.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, writers, the whole spectrum, every single, anything works as long as it gets the book onto the page. So I hope all our listeners tonight will get the chance right away to read Rich Blood and Red Flags and Suspect and Fox Creek. You have your reading cut out for a wonderful week to come. And thank you for joining us on Rogue Reads. Next month is a very special Halloween episode. Make sure you follow us and look for the newsletter and check out our website to see who you will be meeting in October for Halloween Rogue Reads fun. And thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful night.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you.